Chapter 11 about accountability really kind of dives into some of those deepest things that scare us the most in teaching right now, and that is accountability. When we talk about assessment and standards and stuff, a lot of talk in the chapter about national curriculum, national tests, those kinds of things. And as you can imagine, I get kind of whiny and crabby again with it, but nonetheless, it's still coming, and I hope it serves you better. Shorter this time. I think you'll like that part of it, but I'm going to ask you to do a little more here, especially on the discussion questions. Please come in and respond to the discussion. I want you to at least get some thinking, read what some of the others are saying about things, that kind of what adds to a well-rounded experience here in the course. So I think I have 3 different ones on the discussion board this week. Chapter 11, Accountability and Assessment. Chapter 11, Standards, Assessments, and Accountability. And you'll see the textbook laid out exactly that way. Standards, Assessment, and Accountability. And the 3 things that create more angst for teachers than anything in recent past. And teachers still not quite sure where to go. It's a big change. And the chapter... we'll talk about this a number of times where this is, but let's get right to it. Education in the news story brings some of the 3 major topics to be addressed: standards, assessment, and accountability. Being held accountable for making a difference in student learning. That's the standard. That it was accountable for teaching. Now it's accountable for student learning. Fair or not, that's the change in the profession in the last 10 years, the last 15 years. The only way to accomplish this is to have a clear understanding of 1, what students are to learn, 2, responsible ways for measuring learning, and 3, the fair process for developing or for evaluating teachers. Okay, those are the 3, and that goes right here. And we're going to call this our number 1. 3 things right here. What students are to learn, responsible for ways to measuring learning, and the fair process for evaluating the teachers. Let's go on about standards. What are standards? Well, they're a description of what is expected, the output from some sort of endeavor. It used to be in schools, it was the input. What were you teaching? Now standards say, what do they know? What have they learned? Obviously, it's still going to matter what you're teaching, but we're going to not measure what you're teaching as much as what's being learned. In manufacturing has this too, that have a quality, the standard of the quality of the product. Right? Don't you want that if you're buying something? You want some kind of a standard to which it's measured against. So now state and federal policymakers expect students to meet standards. It used to be local, it used to be teachers, it used to be parents. Now we've turned it over to state and federal government to determine what students are to learn, what standards they meet. Standards have different meanings to different users. Some people view them as synonymous with rigor and setting high expectations for schools. Okay. That's sometimes when we say standards, that's what's thought of. Others focus on the learner outcomes of what students or teachers should know when they finish. So it might be high expectations. Others should be, what should they know when they finish a grade or a college? We do that with you in teacher ed. What should you know when you finish? So others equate standards with high stakes tests, such as annual state test or teacher licensure tests, which must be passed to receive a license to teach. As an instructional approach, standards-based education places student learning at the center. Let's go back over here. Have a major consequence. Hence the thing of high stakes is because of the consequences of the outcome of them. So what is standard-based? It's the use of explicit outcomes of what students should know. This is on the test. What is standards-based? It's what the explicit outcomes of what they should know or be able to do, which are outlined in standards to develop instruction and assessment. And so the instruction and assessment have to come back to what should they know. It's a concept of set specific specifications. These could be about school construction, school accreditation, licensure, or doctor and lawyers, or criteria for performance of new aircraft. All would be standard-based. Teaching today, standards and specs for learning, they can range in scope from being extremely global and ambitious to very narrow and specific. And you know that if you've dabbled in standards at all. At their simplest, standards are statements that describe what we should know and be able to do. Grab that phrase, you need that. So what about this, the conception of standards for student learnings? Well, let's go on here. Diverse conceptions of this. Diverse conceptions of standards stem from differing expectations. Okay, what are these? Diverse conceptions, differing expectations. Business leaders tend to want high school graduates who are ready to work. And so you're going to come up with this all, the business leaders, policymakers, and parents. So the business leaders want them who are ready to work. Read, write, compute, as well as dispositions, willing to provide specific job training themselves, but they do not want to have to teach them basic skills. Okay, that's one, the business leaders who are going to employ these kids. The second one, the policymakers, the politicians. What do they want? They think about the larger long-term needs of society. They are concerned about graduates having knowledge and skills that help the United States maintain a competitive edge in the global economy. I am so tired of hearing about global economy, but that's what the politicians want. Therefore, they promote rigorous academic standards that will ensure that students' academic standards that will ensure this. And then the third group, parents. What do parents want? They choose standards based on their own personal goals, family histories. Some parents want their children to go to prestigious colleges. Others want their children to obtain a job immediately. And we've talked about this before, how varied this is. And still others want their offspring to prepare for a professional career, such as a medical doctor, lawyer, or engineer. These expectations influence the type of learning outcomes and parents' support. So this is number 2. You come up with what each of these want, and I'll give you a heads up. There's a question on the test for each of these. Now I say to you, I'm going to harp on this the rest of the time about standards. Look how varied what these folks want. How in the world can you pass this off to a state or to a federal government to set standards when these are so varied? And ultimately then, this is who gets to make the decision over all 3 of these. And so I'm sorry, I'm going to whine about that the rest of the way through. But first of all, you address what each want. So developing and adapting a clearly articulated, coordinated set of standards is not easy. Not all members of the community agree on what standards are appropriate. And the community doesn't get to decide anymore. We gave that away. This is old school. This is old stuff. This is pre 15 years ago, where the community decided. Well, the nice thing about the community is you could get the people in the room and have a discussion. But we've sold it out now. We've prostituted ourselves. It's gone. Somebody else gets to decide. And despite these difficulties, development of clear standards enables different constituents within the school community to clarify the needs of their aspirations. The process of electing provides a forum, not only this. So first of all, at this time, developing national consensus around what's called Common Core Standards, and I will say to you that is a false statement. There is no national consensus. There is no national consensus, so it's a misnomer there. But what is Common Core Standards? You've had to have heard of this. Beginning in the 80s, many professional associations, curriculum groups, and statewide education committees began developing standards related to student learning. The first set of standards to receive widespread attention was math. Council for Math, and there's a question on the test about which one had standards first, and it's math. 89. Math teachers and math education joined together to develop this statement of student learning outcomes and related standards about the instruction. Over the next 10 to 20 years, many sets of standards were published. So many, in fact, that they were impossible for all of them to be addressed. In 2009, the National Governors Association and Council for Chief State School Officers, that's the group. This is what I'm saying. So these are really a bipartisan standard. Who are these people? Where are the teachers? Where are the parents? These are all bureaucrats in a smoke-filled room in the back. And I'm telling you, it was a small group of these. Don't tell me that was this community thing. It's not. We know it's not this group here. Okay, they use this term, Council, National Governors Association. I assure you, the governors did not do this. There was some surrogates that did this. Same with the school finance officers, or school officers. Okay, these two curriculum areas to be addressed were English and math. Development of science standards has been underway, but it has taken more time. And the thing with science, that's when they're going to co-opt and own creation or evolution. And it doesn't matter which way you see that standard, that topic, every one of those now will be owned by this federal group. Okay, that'll be the beauty of this, that's all going to be taken away. And they're now known as Common Core Standards. As of 2012, all but 4 states, and it names them, the smart ones, have signed on to adopt these standards and implement them by 14. The intent has been to develop standards that focus on what is most essential. Other learning outcomes can be added, but consensus is that all students should learn what is identified the CCSS, Common Core State Standards. Also arranged are learning-centered, not teaching-centered. Rather than describing what teachers should do in the design of instruction, which would be teaching-centered, the standards focus on the expectations of student learning. Development of each of these has involved a broad range of experts, including teachers, scholars, and this. No, we just said it was the governors and the chief school officers. Careful consideration is given to what students should learn in each year of schooling. So Common Core isn't overall, it's each year. There's a standard for each year. What high school graduates should know, so each grade, and what a high school graduate should know in order to be successful in post-secondary education. The foundational design considers English, arts are presented in this table, and there's another table for it also. I want to bring this up here. What the definition Common Core Standards and Learning Centered and Teaching Centered. And let's go over here. Yes, controversial to say the least, as you can tell from my whining. I just can't understand how we would let this go to that level, to the federal government. I just don't understand that. An initiative to develop one set of standards around the world in widespread consensus. For example, I heard of in one school district that the way that the superintendent explained it to his school board, why this was important was, ready for it? Wait for it. Well, if other students moved into our district, they would be working on the same curriculum that we're working on. Are you kidding me? That's the reason we'd give this away to the federal government for that one student a year that moves into our small little school? That they would be on the same curriculum? Not at the same place, and there's no rules or wrong for that, just they'd be studying the same curriculum. Are you kidding me? Okay, so here's the one for English. I'm not going to clip that for you. All right. So they haven't been without debate, and that's one thing I got to give the authors, that they give you a little debate. Not much, but they gave you a little. Let me read it to you. One aim in their development was that the Common Core state standards would be available to all states, but their adoption would be voluntary. Okay, this is what makes it controversy. Or voluntary. Don't have to adopt them. However, in the fall of 2011, President Obama, okay, this is voluntary, tied receiving a waiver from the mandates of No Child Left Behind to states implementing college and career-ready standards. And this is when the governor of South Dakota immediately adopted them. Oh, you mean we can get out from under No Child Left Behind? And this is what I say is when I say to you, don't tell me it's not a federal initiative and owned by the federal government. It is, and right here it is. States had the option to develop their own standards, but the step taken by most has been to adopt the Common Core because everybody wanted this waiver. Another overreach by the federal government in 2002. States had the option to develop this. This direction was angered conservatives who see the president's move as an overreach. Why is that an overreach by the federal government? Because if you're a constitution-based government, there is absolutely no mention of education, and now they are taking over. This now gives them authority over what is to be taught and learned in the schools. Not an overreach, and leading to less state control of education. State control, how about the locals? Education, remember we studied earlier that education is all to be at the state level? And as the day began, the other thing they didn't leave out here is the president also said he awarded race to the top money to states that adopted this early at his discretion. So that was another way he greased the wheel for this to happen. As this debate began to take shape, the governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, pressed lawmakers to abandon state commitment to adopt this. Some academics have argued that there is not a research base. And that's what is our big thing now. Everything has to be research-based, but there was no research behind these standards. When some see it as conspiracy, others see a collaborative effort from this group. School officers develop a shared set of expectations for students learning that in the end would contribute to national global competitiveness. This debate is likely to be long and lasting. And that's what I would like you to put here. This will be number 3. And bold it and red it and circle it. It's going to be long and lasting, and I'm going to say to you again, how do we cut out these other groups out of here in the name of the federal government? That the federal government set those standards. I don't get it. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in your time as teachers. I predict that there'll be some change. What will happen, I predict, is the next president, whichever side of the aisle is from, will give waivers away from this. Even if you've committed to it, there'll be waivers when they find out, some of the challenges that are hard to meet. And one of the things that I think is we look, like anytime you reach from, I call it 10,000 miles up in the sky, the federal government, that there's no connect between these people setting these standards and you, the teacher, down on the ground. You teachers down on the ground, boots on the ground, making this happen. There's no connect. Very easy for folks that high up in the air to sit in these smoke-filled rooms. You realize that's a euphemism, right? That wouldn't be allowed. Somebody would be arrested if it was a smoke-filled room, but that was an old saying. A smoke-filled room meaning that people left them alone and they got to do what they wanted to do. I just don't want you to go away thinking that I was advocating a smoke-filled room, but that's just a euphemism. But they sat in these smoke-filled rooms and come up with this. And there is no widespread consensus on either side of the aisle for this. All right. So what are other lists of standards? First is this world-class standard in the global economy, and I'm going to make this number 4. And you get to do these, 2, 3, and 4, a little framework. And there's a few questions on the tests, certainly about these here. And so let me show you here's some things you could do. The real world ones was about inputs. Here's the opportunity to learn. And right down here, it gives you some of this that you're going to want to bring in. The opportunity to learn and the content standards here, you can bring those in. This one here maybe is the most interesting because this is what we had just prior to a Common Core was content standards, and everybody thought this was a big reach, but this was all done down at the state and the local level. that every state did this, but they included local people, and some of our DSU people got to be involved in this, that you would set the same kind of deal, standards, but standards that we could live with and that we could adjust because it was done down at the local levels. The state ran it, but they included people at the local level that wanted to set those standards, and it fit each state and even communities. And here it tells some of the ones that were involved with that. And so that was the precursor to a federal curriculum. Federal standardized tests was called content standards. Standards that specify learning outcomes in a subject or discipline, for example, math and social studies, but it was at the state level. It was not the federal government. And that's what's so interesting about Common Core was every state had set their content standards. So it's really interesting to me that we rooted that out. And then, of course, states had their state tests and stuff. And then they went to this, there's this 21st century knowledge and skills framework, and this is all about technology. Since standardized tests began to take apart, educators have concerned about such things as critical thinking and problem solving have been ignored. And here's another thing, and you're going to really think I'm whiny now. Critical thinking and problem solving, but what the heck is that? None of you learned critical thinking and problem solving. So for a couple hundred years, we've been teaching kids and not teaching them critical thinking and problem solving. What I'm finding is that is really code words for thinking the way we want you to think. Solve problems the way we want you to solve them. And if you don't do it that way, then you obviously don't have critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So I'm not quite sure and why we think we're teaching that. So in other words, what we have to really do is crush the basics, the classics that we've talked about before, because we need to teach you to have critical thinking and problem-solving. And yet you can't really find anybody to tell you what that is. But it's a good buzzword. We all get excited about it. Critical thinking, problem-solving, let's do it. But what is that? And I would urge you to teach the classics, teach things that kids can use. All right. A number of business leaders and policymakers agree. They called attention to this 21st century skills. Okay, and they would be needed to global economy and rapidly changing world. And then it talks about this partnership of Adobe, Dell Computer, Apple, Microsoft, Blackboard, Leapfrog, Discovery Education, AT&T. Everybody got together and came up with this curriculum of standardized things. So the core subjects are addressed in the content standards through this technology. And so you get to put that in also. It goes on over here. Again, critical thinking, problem solving, communications, and collaborations. And communication and collaboration is dramatically changed with technology. But to say we have to teach you critical thinking and problem solving, I just don't get that. That, in other words, if we educate you well with the classics, you won't be a critical thinker. I think what they're doing to my kids in school is they're saying critical thinking looks like this. It's thinking the way we think. And if you think different than that, we say to you, you're not a critical thinker or a problem solver. And I've got some evidence of that, and I don't want to rant anymore, but my kids come home and say they disagreed with something and they were taken to the woodshed. You're not doing it right. You don't know. You're naive, those kinds of things. And so it was exasperating to my kids, but I said, but that's what we do. That's critical thinking, problem solving, is you got to think like the teacher does. So having skills related to information, media, technology can be important. So what about the federal role and standards? Well, meeting of the governors in '89, President George Bush called for the development of content standards to ensure the nations of this, be international of this. Again, his baby was No Child Left Behind. He too overreached. He too has no authority whatsoever. He's the one that passed and signed No Child Left Behind. Okay. Federal support standards P12 students were developed in subsequent years by professional associations and other groups. The standards developed by these associations sometimes had great support from Congress, but not always. For example, Standards for Social Studies, which promoted the multicultural contribution of the nations, were defeated in '95 by Congress, 99-1. Bill Clinton followed by signing Goals 2000. He too wanted to reach, but his didn't have any teeth. Goals 2000. So let's go up here. Meeting of governors. This is President Bush. Here's President Clinton. And then the second President Bush was No Child Left Behind. Okay, and he too was a big government guy. Said, I know better. I will run these schools. I will tell you. And then the only thing his was the first one, federal piece of legislation that had teeth, meaning accountability. And this is what drove teachers and the teachers unions nuts. They went crazy. His life threatened his life. I mean, this was the end of school as we knew it. It would destroy schools. This overreach by the federal government. No Child Left Behind. And NCLB, that's all we heard for 10 years. It permeated every academic thing you went to, every education thing, every conference I went to. That was number thing, and how horrible this piece of legislation was. 2001. Called for a major testing program. That was their thing. It was the first one that said you have to test, because we're going to hold you, the school, the district, and the teachers accountable for what kids are learning. State tests were aligned with state student standards. Okay, this was before Common Core. The next reach was that the government, the feds, will give you the curriculum. But here said you had to test to see if they were reaching state standards, the content standards at each grade level. The testing against content standards began with math and English and language arts. So Left Behind required all states to set standards, which our state did, what child should know and learn in grades in math, reading, and science. In addition, the states were required to set a level of proficiency. Okay, that's, again, the feds are saying this, and whether standards are being met by students. Schools were expected to make adequate yearly progress. So this was a big one that everybody still talks about, is AYP, AYP, AYP. Okay, so you're going to get to do a bunch here. So let me just hold on a second. Okay, I'm back, and now this is where you come in. The federal expectations were stated that 1. Low-income students, 2. Students with disabilities, 3. English language learners from different racial and ethnic backgrounds were to meet state proficiencies. Okay, very good. If AYP is not achieved by one or more of these groups for more than 2 years, the school would be identified as needing improvement. No Child Left Behind also required that by 13, all students would be proficient a level at their grade. And so what you need to do here is come for number 5 here, is you're going to tell me those 3 groups. And again, you're doing a nice job, but continue to mark those well for me so I can see them. But I'll quickly go back and review those. What took 3 groups specifically that President Bush mentioned? Low-income students, students with disabilities, and English language learners, second language ones. And the other one, it's interesting here that was there that they're not mentioning, is low-income kids, if you're described as low income. Okay, by 11, it was clear that all children would not be proficient. Okay, you look at this. This is what you get with federal government. In addition, it was becoming clear that the majority of schools in each state were not meeting their AYP targets. Okay, and actually it was by 14, and they said 13 here. But the schools, students weren't proficient, schools weren't proficient, which likely lead to the majority of schools in each state being labeled as failing. There also were the erroneous pressures on school to have test scores continually rising. Due to the failure of Congress to pass the next authorization of this, in the fall of 2011, President Obama announced a waiver process through which states could move out from under this achievable mandate. You know what the waiver was? Common Core standards. As part of the waiver app, states had to adopt college and career-ready standards, move to growth scores for interpreting and developing an educational system. So if you would adopt, this is how they greased the way for this. If states didn't want this, but if you would adopt, we will overlook the fact that your schools are failing to meet AYP. Okay? And so that's what you got to put here. Rankings including needing improvement here in your 3 groups, and then I want you to add low income to that one here, even though they didn't. Low income students. Okay, they had to test annually, and that was there. And again, I say to you, with this picture here, an overreach by the federal government, by both President Bush and President Obama. Both have completely overreached their authority according to the Constitution. Now, if you don't think the Constitution has anything to do with this. And many times you'll hear people say that it's outdated and stuff, well, then we need to redo that. But if we're going to go from the Constitution, which their oath of office, when they lay their hand on that Bible and raise their other hand, is to uphold the Constitution. And then we do stuff like this, and we overreach, and we become big government people that the feds take over and really illegitimize local control. So that was that, federal standards. And then what's the future of this? State standards drive education today. Several unresolved questions about it. How will school organizations use of time, graduation requirements, power, and relationships change? Can standards be covered and still maintain commitment toward thematic and interdisciplinary instruction? Nobody knows. Nobody knows that. There's no escaping standards in schools today, and you know that. There's no escaping it. This is here to stay. It's not going away. They're not abstract statements that ideals and teachers can simply ignore. They're now driving, right here, what teachers teach. And that's what's so funny about Common Core. They right away said this is not curriculum, it's standards. And again, you're, what's this, a problem solver, you're critical thinker. You know you can't have standards without having the curriculum, without owning the curriculum. So they will tell you what to teach, and they're increasingly underlying base for teacher evaluation. Standards-based education is a complex and sophisticated approach to teaching and learning. It's a professional challenge right here where the cursor is. It's a professional challenge for beginning teachers as well as experienced teachers to learn to teach this way. In other words, what's this way? Teach to the test. Because it's coming, baby. The test is coming. This teacher's role shifts from conveyor of knowledge, which was in my time, and dispenser of grades, to coach, facilitator, and targets students as they engage in learning. And here I put a little pin here, and let me show you what the pin means. The pin says it's on the test. That's the change for teachers, that shift. The expectations and checkpoints are stated and known by teachers and need to be known by their students. Many questions influence the future of standards. How will school organizations' use of time, graduation, powers do this? With Common Core, state standards really become the basis for determining a national curriculum, and I say yes. You got to get it in frame. It's a framework in place. The framework is there. You can now create a national curriculum because you already had the framework for standards and testing is in place. And so I guarantee when the national curriculum comes, states will throw up their arms and say, oh, well, and we'll have a nationalized curriculum. So in other words, influence from outside, from the east, from the left coast and the other left coast will now tell us what and how to teach, or what the curriculum and how to test here in South Dakota. One important outcome of standards movement is the intense focus on the use of data. And that was the part that we forgot to tell you in Common Core, that if you're going to adopt Common Core, you have to turn over all data that's gleaned from your tests of your students. And there is now a universal expectation that all decisions about instruction, student learning, and teacher and school quality will be based on data, and that's somewhat readily accepted. Whether data is accurate or not, we're going to base everything on that. One important consequence is, if from now on, teachers need to pay significant attention to ways of assessing student learning and using the information to design and adjust instruction. And let me give you the rest here, future teachers. You better teach your kids how to be good test takers. A lot of you tell me all the time, I'm not good at taking tests. Sorry. If you're going to get your rightly due for the quality of your work, you're going to have to. And how do you teach kids to be good testers? How do you teach them to be good testers, do you think? Right. You have them practice taking time tests in your class. Nobody wants that, but that's a reality, baby. Well, let's get on with this part. The actual assessing of the student learning. As I said, standards are not the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective is learning. So standards really don't serve anything if we don't have this assessment part. The part that nobody likes. Because what assessment also leads to is Well, yes, accountability. Who's accountable for when there's not learning? And that a whole other discussion is who should be responsible for learning. Do the students, do the families have some stake in this? But for the most part, the shift has really been towards, well, yes, you, the teachers. So they have to be linked to the standards, and it's been a big change in education. Previously, it was this. What do I have to do to get an A in here? And I know some of you thought of that way, still think of that way in our college classes, but now the shift is like this. A teacher says, how do I have to adjust my teaching so that students are learning? And a student says, what is it I am to learn here? Okay, and not what am I have to do to get an A, but what I have to learn. And because I have to demonstrate that to you that I've learned it other than a test. So, and with that comes a lot of data. And with that data, that we're able to take that data and massage it and pull it and move it and lie about it and share it with others. That's the importance of data here and why it's critical that all the schools get hooked on so that we can transmit that data to every place else so everybody can see it. So actually, what is assessment? Well, it implies it's that evaluation, grades, tests, performance, reflection, criteria, rubrics, and more. Grades aren't going away. They're changing in what they're meaning. And I, honest to say, I cannot tell what the grades mean on the report cards anymore. That this last time my kids got report card, there was like 3 or 4 different grades for each subject. And none of them are a definitive grade of what they're getting in the subject. For example, one of the boys had an A and a D and a C in a class. Well, so what is the overall grade? It doesn't say. And so you get to decide what that is. And there was 3 different things in there. So to encompass adequately the many dimensions, we'll examine the assessment in a broader sense. The term assessment is derived from the Latin word assessio, which means to sit beside. So you get to have that. That's about number 6. I want you to put that right here. 6. What is this? What is it from? Assessio, and what that means. Assessment, designed to help students. It's gather, interpret, feedback, the whole idea, and those are honorable things. What they're about. To sit beside. So keep in mind, assessing is the larger process of gathering information, interpreting it, and that's a big part too, is interpreting, because that's a whole nother skill. A lot of us can help gather, but what does it mean? And that's why I say we can lie about it, is that oftentimes we can take and interpret this any way you want. It's up to the individual. It's like reporting news. 2 people see the same thing and report it completely different, and that's the way with data, and interpreting data is. The ultimate adjustment is teaching and learning is the outcome. So that's the ultimate here of it, is to help students, and I'm going to say number 7 that I want you to put in here is adjusting teaching. Because if you're not adjusting, it's really kind of meaningless. So that's number 7. So purpose, formative and summative assessments. Teachers today are used to a number of other purposes as well. It's important you understand the difference. Otherwise, you and students of this. So first of all, formative is done to determine what students have learned and provide feedback to them so that both you and the students can understand what's next. Summative is final, and this is always at the end. But whether the desired level of competence has been attained, such as for passing a course. It has the same here. Learn, plan next steps, and make final judgments of it. All right. That's what translated to this. First, assessment of learning. Assessment of learning versus assessment for learning. And so you'll come to that conclusion here. So let's talk about it, and then you enter this. And let me just say here, this will be your number 8, is to compare and contrast. Compare and contrast assessment of versus assessment for learning. So what about assessment of learning? Well, state achievement tests are designed as summative assessments. Tell school officials, parents, and the public whether students are meeting required benchmarks. Assessments of learning education should review the result of gauge how well the students have learned. However, summative assessments of learning often create high stakes situations, which you know, for students, teachers, and their schools. And it could be that the data help principals know which teachers are most successful. It would help districts and state federal governments rank schools. And again, this is where it's a little bit overreach here, is here comes the feds to monitor your school. A major use of summative assessment is acting as gatekeepers. And that's a key word. It's a gate. Often he's a gatekeeper, and that's the one that we go, nobody wants that. But yes, unfortunately, these grades and things, we make lots of determinations with them, and that it tends to be the gatekeeper. Who moves to the next grade? Who graduates? Who's admitted to profession? Who gets to go into College of Ed? Who wins prizes? Who gets scholarships? All that is summative. For example, college admission offices have a long history of using performance and standardized tests like ACT and SAT determine who's admitted. And then there's most states, you have to take a summative test too, which is like the praxis test. And knock it down here, a growing number of states require students to pass tests before diploma graduation is granted. Yikes. Well, let me do this. Let's go make that our first discussion question. All right, that's this one here. Should students have to pass a state test to graduate from high school? All right. So that's our first one.